Welcome to another episode of Powerhouse Talk. My name is Alfonso Ballesteros and I'm your host today. I'm the founder of Crossbow and I'm also a mentor at Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks. And with me, I have our panel of today. We have Karena.
My name is Karena Belin. I'm co-founder and CEO of WHub and AngelHub based here in Hong Kong.
And we have Roy as well.
I'm Roy Lim, the founder and CEO of Robocore. We are currently a tenant in Hong Kong Science Park.
The topic for today is we're going to be talking about how global startups grow local. And there's, of course, a cultural aspect to it, but there are other elements to consider, and we're going to dive deeper into it.
Thank you very much for being here. It's a great pleasure, and I love talking about startups, you know that, and I particularly love talking about cross-border expansion opportunities. First of all, I always like to mention that it's probably not a question on where to go, more a question of sequence, where to go first. I think startups by definition have a business model that they would like to scale and scale really broadly and really globally. And I think when you're looking at where to expand next, there would be two considerations I would put at heart for every startup founder. You're basically bringing your proven product market fit, your business models overseas. So it's about understanding the market. And to understand the market, nothing better than really having a thorough understanding personally, or to have trusted partners that help you connect to the market, right? You need to get that validation as fast as you can. So I would argue it's more a relationship question where to go first than a business question. Because partners can help you overcome the trust issue, can be the warm introduction, and really can help you understand the unwritten rules and where to go first, where to avoid to go, etc. So that's one thing, also in terms of top line growth. The second thing is obviously interesting. Depending on your business model, different markets have different costs associated. And I think that's very interesting to understand and try to dig a little bit deeper. We can talk about some case studies later on if you want, where I can underpin the fact that maybe doing a little bit research on the cost element side. That's actually an experience that we as AngelHub made quite painfully ourselves on realizing when we would expand into Europe, we would actually need to have a license for an investment platform. And with the ESMA regulations, that license in any country is passportable. Long story short, we just realized that the cost setup of operating a business in France was really not in a way conceivable with the business model and the unit economics that work here. So we had to pull the plug.
How about you, Roy, from your own experience with your own company? What can you share? I'm sure there's a lot of points that you can build on regarding where to go first and what difficulties you faced.
Yes, so we have built a robot that is open platform. So basically we can adapt to different market, different culture, different industries. So in the beginning, we actually thought of finding a place that has all kinds of different companies concentrated in one city, and there is no place better than Hong Kong. So here we started. We get connected to many different companies. Their corporate headquarters are all here. So we expose our technology to them, and then they introduce this technology to their branches all over the world. And then we identify whichever company has the most number of branches that we can approach. So we can design one solution, and then it can spread to, let's say, Walmart. They have thousands of outlets in United States. So we focus on these kind of companies so that we limit our effort, but we can expose to the most amount of customers at this in one effort that we spend. So we started ourselves from US. We won that market because almost every company there has thousands of branches. So we just need to look for that one company that we can work with.
Excellent. Hong Kong is one of the highest concentrations of regional headquarters and very diverse. There is almost the same amount of American regional headquarters as mainland. And then you also get Europeans and you also get a lot of Japanese and so on. So it's not just the concentration. I advise startups to always consider Hong Kong first. But once they have started here and they start opening doors, that's when we go into, for example, the cost problems and the idiosyncrasies of each market. So how can you give us, for example, some case studies or personal experiences of, above all, for example, how you discovered that your initial approach was not what ultimately happened, like that learning process, for example, Karena?
Yeah, well, arguably it's the numbers who would tell you, right? That it's really the validation from the market, from your customers, right? That would tell you if you're doing the right thing or not. But I said I'm very happy to share maybe one case study that is dear to the heart of Hong Kong Science and Technology Park as well, because it's Lalamove. So Lalamove is one of the companies we with WHub knew from the very early beginning and supported in various ways. And I still remember actually a talk from Blake who mentioned when they were looking to expand their proven business model, so product market fit in Hong Kong, overseas, they looked at a market, again, from a very theoretical point and thought about which market is closest to Hong Kong. And they said, well, obviously Singapore, right? English speaking, city-state, small, so let's go to Singapore. And actually very quickly what they realized, some of the elements that were really important for their success, which was customer behavior, was so different from the customer behavior in Hong Kong. So infrastructure conditions, we talked language, legal setups, all of that, very, very similar, but that was not the key point for success. So they actually made the learning on the ground, seeing that the traction was not building up. And then their expansions overseas on the other side of the border to mainland China was way more successful because the customer behavior was way more similar, going to Shenzhen rather than going to Singapore. So very interesting, which is a bit the crux when you look at where does your product fit. It's on which aspect of your product and your key advantages the customer behavior arguably fits.
We had an experience like that with a client that they had a very successful app in Austria, and it made a lot of sense to come to Hong Kong. It was a tourism app that essentially turned any city into almost like a museum where you go and you scan and you hear a description of what you're seeing and so on. Very successful in Vienna. When they came over here, turns out that the customer behavior was very different because even though they loved the product, they were not, the mainland customers visiting Hong Kong were not willing to pay in the format and with the concept that the Europeans did. So even when people love your product, if they're not used to paying for it, it's actually, so I completely agree, because sometimes we think that when we grow internationally, it's about the language or the religion or no, it's customer behavior. It's such a prominent role. And you have some stories to share as well, Roy, about that and about culture. I remember talking earlier.
Yes, so basically in the beginning, we started in Hong Kong. We sold the machine to a bunch of elderly homes, but then we need to find the big customer. So we started to approach the US market, the European market, and we found that every country has a different systems. For example, in the United States, they actually use insurance-based payments for the elderly care, which means everyone bought insurance, and then if you have an expense, you ask the insurance company to pay for everything, including the visit to doctor, the ambulance cost, everything is paid by the insurance company. In Europe, it's a little bit different because they have, like in the UK, they have the health, the NHS. So they need to get all this money paid into the hospital first, and then the hospital get these money to pay for the expenses. It's a completely different way of working with the United States and the European system. And then we also went to the Middle East, and they have no nursing home at all. So we just realized that when we approached, I landed in Middle East and then found that I have nowhere to sell, because the culture, they don't send any of their elderly into a foreign location to live in. So they stay at home, and then we have to adjust whatever we have, the software, the hardware, so that it can stay in the houses. So now we have 3 different systems to adjust to.
I wanted to jump to a different topic now. I have a couple more topics I wanted to pick your brain on. One is the question of human resources, talent. What's your experience when expanding or helping expand?
Yeah, I'm happy to share some of insights that I have seen from companies coming into Hong Kong or vice versa, Hong Kong companies scaling into Europe or anywhere else overseas. I think we all heard that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And building up a company culture is already arguably difficult in your home country, in your home location. I think there, what we talked about, really that human aspect when scaling overseas and trying to understand unwritten rules, to understand if you scale into Europe, the written rules. And again, one of the reasons we probably hesitated for a long time even to consider Europe is it seems, particularly when it comes to labor law, very, very complicated. These are elements that are super crucial. And I think one of the things that we have seen, again, successful teams do is very quickly associate at the very beginning people who help them understand the unwritten rules, the culture things. And again, that's one of the reasons why most of the founders go back to a country where they're originally coming from, or they really have close partnerships, or we haven't talked about investors, right? But that is maybe one of the reasons why you want to associate with capital that is knowledgeable and that helps you to soft land there.
Excellent.
And actually, we would look at the market itself. For example, for my company, we have a bunch of hardware engineers in Guangzhou because it's very difficult to find a hardware engineer in Hong Kong. Nowadays, if you want someone to write something on a PCB, it's almost impossible here. But if we want a software engineer to research in AI, then we have abundance of them in Hong Kong. So we actually want to build a team that is global. We use software like Jira, we use Slack to actually connect them every day. We ask all our engineers to be online every day in a Zoom call for 8 hours a day, and they can connect to each other. They can always yell out, and then people will answer them.
And I think maybe a practical advice for everybody listening in from Hong Kong or from Asia when you go to Europe, right? So again, there's Europe and there are different countries, but even within one country, right? If I take just for example the case of Germany, and not to do a shameless plug on Berlin, right? But again, thinking about ecosystems, and you probably have in Spain, you would say the same thing. There are probably certain cities or certain ecosystems that are more diverse and more used to welcoming foreigners. So I think one of the things I was very surprised when I started being more involved with the Asia Berlin initiative is that Berlin and Hong Kong have a lot of similarities when it comes on being very open, business languages, English, having a kind of like melting pot of different nationalities and different cultures. So maybe some specific places then within Europe are then easier as a first step, as a first market entry to then expand into the rest.
What we did is we look for a distributor because I talked about engineers who can actually work anywhere. But for sales, it's actually has to be the people from the country. So we hire actual local distributor who sometimes get funding from us to hire our own sales, but sit in their office. So this way we can immediately get over the cultural barrier and they can start selling from day one. I think that's very important. We just cannot send someone overseas and then expect them to do anything properly.
And I wanted to ask you to give a few last concepts that you would like to share. If there was something from our conversation that you still felt that you would like to share.
Yeah, one thing I definitely also would like to share is we talked a lot about bringing your product market fit overseas and how to recruit. I think the financial piece or the investment part, the funding part is always a question that I get asked in terms of how do you go about raising capital at home to go overseas or versus overseas. Again, probably an entire podcast series in itself. But I think it would be really worthwhile for everybody who considers coming into Asia or from Asia overseas to really understand there get very cultural differences when it comes about raising funds, earlier stage, later stage, very different approaches. And I think that is something that there are a lot of myths out there. The entire venture capital scene has evolved, generally speaking. We know profit is not a dirty word anymore, and money is not cheap anymore, or not for free available anymore. So there are a lot of things where I think startup founders would really be well advised to talk to other startup founders having experience in their fundraising journey.
Excellent. Thank you.
So for me, I think I talked about a lot of stuff, adapting to different environment and all these cultures. It's not possible unless you have a product with an open platform. So you have to build your product with the fundamentals, with an operating system that is changeable when you see different customers, when you see a different usage. So it's very important to be open. Don't try to make a shortcut and make one usage, because it will take much less money for you to make one usage and then start selling it, but you will saturate the market very fast, and then you'll be done. So we really have to make a product that is scalable, that is open, and wait for the opportunity to come. And that's my advice.
Well, excellent insights. Thank you, Karena and Roy, for joining me today. And to the audience, thank you for joining us, and see you next time.